Mr. Wever, I was wondering what you think of the criticism that is being given on Mr. Juncker in the last couple of days, apparently from the German government. And I was hoping you could express your views on what Juncker is doing and if he's the right person to do it.
I don't understand that criticism. The EU Commission under Jean-Claude Juncker has done a good job over the last years, and I think there has been progress in a number of areas, and there are still a number of important proposals to be dealt with. During the concrete debate on Brexit, to some extent the officials in Brussels have had their hands tied because they had been asked by the relevant British authorities for there to be no European intervention, no intervention being European level, and then to come along after that and criticise the fact that there had been no intervention, I think is going too far. We can hardly have that responsibility laid at our door.
David Carretta, Radio Radicale, Italian radio. Two questions on what the European Commission is doing today on two issues. The first one is the Stability Pact. Apparently the European Commission will delay again the possibility to sanction Spain and Portugal. And then on the banking sector, the European Commission is open to the possibility to stretch the rules on bail-in to help Italy to confront the bank crisis. On this subject, are you on the Juncker side, or do you think that it should stick to the rules agreed in the last 4 years? Thank you.
Well, the
EPP group supports, just over the last 2 years, we support the basic approach of flexibility. That is that the existing rules need to be taken into account, but we need to focus on growth, and this is also the agreement which was reached and which has been reached in the European Council too. And on the other hand, we also insist on sticking to the rules and to make sure that these rules are applied. So the flexible application of these rules, but they can't be infringed upon. So we need to really find a golden mean. And on all the items that you mentioned, which need to be implemented, we need to find this middle road. For Portugal, for Spain, it is important to see how reforms have been carried out. Portugal and Spain have actually taken a very stable path, especially Portugal. And the socialist government under Costas has introduced a whole series of changes to make it more attractive to investors. But he took all of this back, and he's now introduced the 35 hours a week, and I think this is really weakening the economic position of Portugal. The EU Commission needs to make it quite clear that there is no alternative to reform. All those governments that are watering down all these measures are going to make growth more difficult and are going to weaken their economic position. So we want flexible application of the rules, but the rules need to be applied. We don't want to break the rules, and the Commission needs to support those reforms that will make this particular continent grow. I'd like to make it quite clear that Matteo Renzi and the Italian government coalition, together with Angelino Alfano, over the last few months have introduced reforms in Italy which have made competitiveness stronger. So all these reforms, all these changes which are going to improve the country, the state, all of this needs to be supported by us and by the European Commission.
Thank you very much, Enrique Salveto from the Spanish newspaper ABC. Coming back to the previous question about the future of the European Union, what is your opinion about the next informal summit on 27 in Bratislava, especially in Bratislava, meaning that some countries are pushing for a more role for countries, states, for intergovernmental method, and lowering the role of the Commission.
Ich glaube, die Menschen sind.
Well, I think people are perhaps bored with our interinstitutional discussions. I think Brexit is a call for political certainty, and when the people, if the people in Europe see from Bratislava that their elected representatives have succeeded, for example, on the question of the refugees, if those leaders are able to take a common decision on matters such as that and can solve the problems, then I think that much of the criticism that we've had over the last few months would disappear, and people would say Europe's working. So we're interested in facts, in practice rather than theory. We defend our model. It works at European level. We're dealing with that in terms of coastal defences, border defences, for example, at the moment. The community system has delivered results, but what's important is that the heads of state and government articulate the political consensus on the continent, and when that happens, then people will be happier with Europe.
Yes, thank you, Katalin Harmai, Hungarian newspaper Népszabadság. My question would tackle the Brexit and its possible repercussions on the member states. In the last few days, some members of the Hungarian government expressed their views that they rather would vote against the EU membership if there was a referendum in Hungary on this topic. So my question is, are you concerned by these declarations, taking into account that these are members of the party which belongs to the European People's Party? Thank you.
Well, that's precisely what I meant when I said earlier, there's not really much point, if everybody just puts forward his own opinion. I mean, the positions are very clear. The views have been exchanged. We don't want to stick to our views in when we look at Europe. What we're looking for here is to find a consensus, a compromise. That is, we need to look each other in the eye and establish this compromise. So I'd like to ask all of you, not just express your own opinion, but show the will to take a step forwards. This is important and refers to all important and responsible politicians. It's not a question of trying to make clear what your differences are. It's a question of coming closer together so that we understand the same Europe. I've been listening to the different comments. I'm from the SER radio. Now, I've been listening to the different views. Are his posts under threat?
Well, I read all sorts of newspapers, but for me, the discussion is irrelevant. Jean-Claude Juncker is doing a good job for the European Commission, and we work closely and successfully with him.
Vasilin Zverev, Clubs Media Bulgaria. Mr. Weber, have you discussed at the Council of the Presidents a situation where theoretically a large part of the British MEPs leave the European Parliament? Can this create legal problems for the Parliament, and how, if you have discussed this, how do you intend to tackle this? Thank you.
Es gibt für den Moment dazu.
Well, that's not under discussion at the moment in the European Parliament, and it's clear in our group, the EPP, that the members from the UK are elected members and they have a job to do. We want stability, and that means that we stick to the provisions of the existing treaty. Of course, the British MEPs have to draw their own conclusions on some matters, but in political terms, I think it's surprising that Nigel Farage has withdrawn as UKIP president, but is still a group leader, a group president in the European Parliament. I find that rather bizarre. I think if he has a scintilla of consequentiality, then he should step down as group leader in the European Parliament and stop perpetrating these lies that we've got used to over such a long period. But that's not likely to happen, or rather anything is likely to happen with these populist groups.
Catherine Fiore, EU reporter. I'm afraid it's a further Brexit question. But the legislative process in the EU is quite slow, so initiatives that will be proposed in the next 2 years may reach final agreement in, say, 3 or 4 years and then be implemented in 5 or 6 or even longer. In the UK Parliament, after the Scottish referendum, they said that the Scottish would not be allowed to vote on EU I'll start again. The English will vote on English laws, and Scotland could not vote where it's solely a matter that concerns England and Wales. So I'm wondering if something similar can be proposed for the European Parliament, because this is legislation that's about the EU, and an EU of 27 is when it's going to be implemented.
We respect the treaties. We respect the treaties, and the treaty says that that there are possibilities within the meeting of the heads of state and government to participate or not to participate. And it is possible for that to happen, but there are no similar arrangements for the European Parliament. And the European Parliament takes the position that as long as the UK respects the rules, then we also respect the rules. And therefore, British MEPs remain participants. It would be good, though, if the British government would come forward with an early statement to clarify this situation and to remove the uncertainty as far as possible. I said in my speech today that all across Europe, citizens see that we have a major problem if a country leaves the EU. It's not the problem. It's not a problem in Berlin that they see. It's not a problem in Rome, Bratislava, anywhere else. It's a UK problem. There's the Scottish problem that you mentioned. Scotland is on the verge, perhaps, of going its own way. There's the whole question of Ireland. There's the question of Gibraltar. We have to look at or we have to understand that if income falls, you may have to raise taxes. You can't have falling income and falling taxes. And we hope that the citizens of Europe will understand what the consequences are of playing with this Project Europe. The damage will not be damage to Europe. It will be damage to the UK, and we hope that this can be handled successfully so that people eventually understand how important the EU is to all of us.
Any other question? Thank you very much.